So I'll define racialized trauma as psychological or emotional experience or distress and harm that's associated with exposure to cumulative experiences of racism. Racialized trauma is associated with individual as well as systemic inequalities. In terms of social work practice, the way we could see racialized trauma, let me think about people with lived experiences first. And it might be feelings of mistrust of social workers, particularly if their social workers are from a system that they consider Eurocentric, a system that they might consider to be facilitated through power and white privilege, for example. So feelings of fear, feelings of mistrust, and maybe a sense of cultural loss, where we see people with lived experiences from minoritized and racialized backgrounds feeling they've lost the meaning to their culture, and maybe feelings of being misunderstood in terms of their history. So in service users, sometimes it might be that you might see service users expressing this through anger and frustration, and often that can be misunderstood because it might be considered as lack of engagement, perhaps, or reluctance to engage or hostile. But it's important to really understand that that might be as a result of negative experiences that they've encountered, not just indirectly, but also systemically and intergenerationally in relation to race and racism. From a cultural perspective, you probably see a lack of cultural competence, lack of understanding of the history of service of people with lived experiences, lack of curiosity in terms of understanding why are they feeling like that, why are they expressing this way, and often we hear about challenges around understanding language, lifestyles that people experience that might be misunderstood in terms of how people of ethnic minorities might behave in their parenting, for example, their lifestyles, for example, and often that can be perceived as racism that might contribute to additional racialized trauma for those people with lived experiences. It's important to think about collaborative working and partnership working, because without that, I think it's difficult to develop positive relationships with people, and being able to listen, active listening, where we really want to explore where is this coming from in terms of minoritized ethnic social workers and how they themselves have experienced perhaps microaggressions or racism within the workplace with colleagues. And sometimes we hear of that as well from service users who might be saying, I don't want to work with you because of your race, and racism as well that they experience in light of that. It evokes intense emotions and frustration that may impact on decision making, for example, the provision of safe spaces for people to talk about their feelings and to really explore what might be going on for them within the workspaces. But I also think it's important to create space to really reflect on the reality of racialized trauma and how it might look like, both for people with lived experiences that social workers work with, but also for colleagues, so that when there are certain behaviors that are presented within the workplace, that's not necessarily misunderstood. So I think this whole work calls for empathy, and if we want to think about trauma-informed work, because if we think about racialized trauma, we have to understand it as any other type of trauma.